Okay, so first of all, I would like to thank everybody for the enormous effort in this enterprise and for their participation, lively participation, comments, discussion, disagreement. I think I personally learned a tremendous amount from this 2 days. Hopefully you have learned some too. I have the difficult task to try to summarize everything, so I'm going to leave out something for sure. Not only summarize, but also trying to think about the way forward. Quoting our former mayor, you never want a serious crisis to go to waste. It seems that we are in a serious crisis. We need to do something. Now, if I were to rank the common patterns or the ideas that got the most support in order of sort of how much they were supported, the thing that had a universal sort of endorsement was having more data to analyze more. Now, this seems a little bit lame because academics that ask for more data and more studies seems to be very lame. I think it's actually not that lame. Why? Because going back to Nolan report, one of the things that give power to the digital platform is the complexity and the opacity, so opaqueness. So I think that having that opportunity to do serious data is an extremely important point we need to fight for. The second, and there are limitations, etc., but the idea of setting the defaults for privacy in a more consumer-friendly way seems like a low-hanging fruit that might not be perfect, but I think certainly has some legs. The question of do some reform of the Section 230 along the line of what the media report seems to suggest. I think there is also some agreement there. And everybody mentioned a digital authority, and I think that that's certainly potentially a very good idea. It remains to be discussed what John de Figueiredo pointed out very correctly, how you design an authority in a way that does not end to actually be captured the old-fashioned way. And by the way, for those of you who like Brandeis has a quote that seems to anticipate Stiglitz saying that sometimes when you do reforms, those reforms and those institutions are captured by the very people that you're trying to fight. So I think it's not just a Stiglitz idea, goes a long way. And then I think that I'm particularly taken by the idea of changing the burden of the proof in the antitrust cases. I think that that is a result of a sentence that was said by Furman, but I think summarized a lot of the spirit here, is not doing anything is extremely costly in an uncertain world with irreversibility. And I think that the politics report made it very clear of how concentrated this power here it is and how difficult it is to revert any mistake. So I think that when we talk about mistakes, the mistakes of breaking up something that might not be broken up or letting it go and consolidate, I am not as cavalier as Matt in saying, oh, who cares, we break up everything and it's cheap. I'm not that bad, but I think there is an element of that in say, look, if you analyze cost of error type 1, cost of error type 2, it seems that we're in a phase that cost of error type 1 is bigger than type 2. Now, we're going to try the impossible task of summarizing all this stuff that seems to have a broader consensus and bring it to Washington. Maybe it's because when I was a kid, I saw the movie by Frank Capra, Mr. Smith Go to Washington, and I fell in love with it. I think that probably have the same naivete of James Stewart, not the same aplomb, but I think that we're going to try to do that in September. Now, I think there is something else that I derive from this, and I know that some people will disagree with this, but it seems to me that the idea that there is something more to antitrust than just the consumer welfare is something that every reasonable person who is not an antitrust expert agree with. So if you think that from Francis Fukuyama to Chris Hughes is not just the radical open market people, even the mainstream people agree with that. Now, however, antitrust has a very serious argument that I understand comes from the Chicago School, but I think is a very sound argument, which is in a world with non-specialized courts, and I have to say, I'm sorry, Fiona, but being Italian, the term specialized courts smells of fascism, and so it's something we don't go much along. And the example that was brought, I don't remember by whom, of patents is not a very good one. So I'm not so sure that we're going to go in the direction of specialized courts. Short of not going that direction, I think the issue of administering this stuff is very sort of difficult. And the issue of potential political abuses. We live in a country where Richard Nixon was using the IRS against his political enemies. And by today's standard, Richard Nixon was actually a good president. So I think that we are really in a difficult situation to manage. However, I think that in the last 30 years, economics and political science have done tremendous improvement in trying to measure what Andrea Pratt was calling citizen welfare, in trying to measure capture, in trying to measure sort of how the political power is used and abused. So I think that what I would like to envision for next year is going to be a call for paper on trying how to implement in a scientific way a different kind of welfare, of antitrust that for the benefit of Fiona and company, we're going to keep separate, okay? We're going to do two things. We're going to be the economic antitrust. You're going to keep working the way you want. And it's right, because in that arena, it's done very well. And my strategy is you don't change something that works well. However, it's not work on a bigger picture. And so I think that we are receiving the message that is hard to make it work in the other direction. I think that's a really tough challenge. And that's a challenge I raise to all of you to think for next year. How can we do a citizen welfare in a scientific way? And before I conclude, however, I want to thank the large group of people that made this event happen. Guy and I had the fun part, which was to think about the intellectual component, but actually delivering things and bringing people here, making sure that they have an hotel and their food, and even organizing things at the last minute, like Chris Hughes, it takes a lot of people involved. So let me start by thanking first the research professional, Andrew, Linda, and Veger, and our intern, Theon, and our administrative specialist, Aman, for the assistant with the room setup, registration, logistic during those 2 days. I want to thank Verl, our communication manager, who has been promoted the conference and tweeted along the conference, and of course, Asher, our writer and editor of ProMarket, who is providing extended coverage at the conference. Really, this conference will not have taken place, and I'm not using a rhetoric figure, it will not have taken place without Filippo, who was the person that did most of the heavy lifting as far as the organization was concerned, and was the liaison of all the committee, and has contributed tremendously to the entire project. Last but not least, I want to thank Rachel, Sebastian, and Simone. They've been crucial in planning the execution of this ambitious endeavor, starting with the committee meetings back in the fall. And actually, one thing I was very proud of when I went to a meeting in Washington, people said, there is actually decent food and vegetarian option. Those are small things, but make the difference, because I want to repeat this. We're not offering anything to anybody. So it's really amazing that you have endured through all of this. Thank you very much.